Buonasera, bentornati, eccoci qua. Allora, giovedì 16 settembre 2021, quarta stagione delle conversazioni sull'Iran. Siamo oramai, abbiamo cominciato bene, no? Il periodo di rotaggio può anche dirsi concluso, siamo oramai nel pieno delle nostre dirette. Questa è la terza diretta di questa settimana. E questa settimana sarà pienissima perché oltre a ieri, l'altro ieri, stasera e domani avremo anche sabato pomeriggio alle 19 con un incontro molto importante che faremo insieme a Negar e insieme all'Istituto Culturale della Repubblica Islamica di Roma. E siete già tanti, intanto saluto Antonella, che ho salutato già prima, e che dice: zio, con sta sigla hai fatto un capolavoro. È vero? No, scherzo, no, è vero. Comunque mi sono molto divertito a farla perché è comunque anche una delle cose che poi mi piace fare, insomma, giocare con le immagini. In un periodo oramai molto lontano mi sarebbe piaciuto fare cinema, quindi insomma da questo un po' si vede. Ciao Francesco 1 e Francesco 2, Guglielmo, buonasera. Allora, oramai credo che noi abbiamo una sufficiente confidenza anche, insomma, a dirci le cose anche in modo molto, molto chiaro e molto esplicito, nel senso che avete voi visto tutti la locandina di questa sera, qual è l'incontro, qual è l'argomento che appunto abbiamo scelto di fare, di cui parlare, appunto una diretta per parlare di una campagna di raccolta fondi fatta da Negar Mortazavi, che è una giornalista irano-americana molto brava, un'analista politica molto importante. Non vi nascondo, vi potrei tenere qui sulle spine per lunghi minuti nell'attesa di Negar. In realtà io Negar non so che fine abbia fatto, nel senso che ci siamo messi d'accordo oramai da un paio di settimane, ci siamo inseguiti, almeno io l'ho inseguita per giorni, le ho mandato messaggi e ci siamo accordati anche per questa mezz'ora di ritardo rispetto alla nostra tradizionale orario di trasmissione, ma Negar non è collegata, per cui io so che insomma non voglio fare come ho fatto molte altre volte in cui comincio a perdere un po' di tempo, la butto sullo scherzo, dico qualche cavolata e poi alla fine l'ospite magari è lì pronto ad arrivare. potrebbe essere così, ma potrebbe anche non essere così. Negar è a Washington DC, e lei è lì che vive. Nei giorni passati era in Europa, avevamo calcolato però tutto anche con il fuso orario, lì sono le 3:30 del pomeriggio, credo che però o ha avuto qualche contrattempo o ci sono dei problemi tecnici, però non mi ha risposto, le ho scritto pochi minuti fa vedendo che non si stava ancora collegando, e a questo punto però io direi che forse comincio io a parlare del suo progetto, perché poi probabilmente insomma quello cioè, ci farebbe molto piacere averla come ospite e parlare con lei, ma visto che lei non c'è io vi parlo innanzitutto una breve presentazione di chi è lei. Negar Mortazavi è una appunto delle personalità che seguo di più, almeno io, sui social per quanto riguarda l'Iran. È una giornalista, è cresciuta in Iran e poi in Germania, si è trasferita negli Stati Uniti molto, molto giovane, e da lì ha intrapreso poi un percorso universitario di studi che l'ha portata poi a seguire il giornalismo. Da anni è uno degli osservatrici più attente e stimate di quello che riguarda le relazioni internazionali dell'Iran, la cronaca politica. Nel suo curriculum ci sono anche delle interviste molto interessanti a Zarif, ancora prima a Mohammed Ali, che è una cosa che insomma, tra l'altro, che invidio tantissimo da un punto di vista professionale e umano, perché è un grandissimo personaggio. E comunque è molto attiva sui social, su Twitter la potete trovare facilmente, ha anche un sito proprio che dopo vi farò vedere, anche un podcast, Iran Podcast, che è sulle maggiori piattaforme, che tra l'altro sono appunto Conversation on Iran, quindi in un certo senso siamo, come dire, sono due trasmissioni parallele, ma ovviamente con molta più autorevolezza. Lei, giuro che io non lo conoscevo prima di cominciare, probabilmente, anzi credo che lei abbia iniziato dopo, ovviamente lei non conosceva affatto l'esistenza di questo nostro piccolo esperimento. Ma quello di cui voglio parlare oggi è questo lavoro, che è una campagna che lei ha avviato lo scorso anno per aiutare gli iraniani a combattere il coronavirus. Allora, le ragioni del perché l'Iran si trovi in questa situazione così terribile della pandemia, perché questa pandemia abbia colpito in modo così violento l'Iran in particolare, cioè molti altri paesi, ma l'Iran è stato uno tra i primi ed è anche uno di quelli che fatica più degli altri, come dire, a ritrovare una parvenza di stabilità, di normalità dopo la crisi pandemica. Sono diverse. Prima tra tutto ovviamente l'embargo, le sanzioni, l'isolamento internazionale, quindi la difficoltà all'inizio a reperire anche soltanto i kit per i test per il coronavirus. Dopo ovviamente la difficoltà e anche diciamo alcune scelte politiche probabilmente tutt'altro che azzeccate riguardo i vaccini. Sta di fatto che oggi l'Iran è un paese che è investito in pieno dall'ondata di coronavirus della variante Delta, e purtroppo la percentuale di popolazione vaccinata è ancora molto bassa. Io faccio vedere i dati, ecco, questi sono i dati complessivi ufficiali, che parlano appunto di oltre 5 milioni di casi e di 116.000 morti. Queste cifre parrebbero dare una stima che è inferiore per gravità a quella che noi, a quella italiana. In realtà molto probabilmente le stime ufficiali sono più alte. Questi sono gli aggiornamenti veramente ad oggi, li ho raccolti poco fa, prima di andare in onda. In questo momento c'è una situazione molto, molto, molto drammatica. Faccio vedere qui la media dei decessi giornalieri, e purtroppo va detto che ancora oggi una media in Iran è una media di circa 500 vittime al giorno, che è un numero altissimo, che ci riporta ai nostri momenti più drammatici, sebbene io sia tra quelli che sostengono che siamo tutt'altro che al di fuori del tunnel, che anche da noi la situazione è molto grave rispetto come dire, anche alle potenzialità e alle prospettive che avremmo avuto un anno fa, perché abbiamo sì il vaccino, ma è evidente che c'è una parte consistente della popolazione che non è vaccinata, e quello è il nostro grande pericolo. In Iran, oltre al fatto che i vaccini ce ne sono stati pochissimi fino veramente ad oggi, finora sono stati soprattutto il Sinopharm, quindi il vaccino cinese, e su questo cominciano ad esserci dei dubbi anche sull'efficacia di protezione di questo vaccino, perché proprio ieri parlavo con una persona che ha avuto un familiare che è morto per Covid-19 nonostante avesse fatto ben due dosi di Sinopharm. Quindi ecco, questa è la realtà. È una realtà che si scontra poi con un isolamento internazionale effettivo. Di Iran e di coronavirus si è parlato molto all'inizio, quando diciamo noi ancora non eravamo investiti in pieno da questa ondata, e se ne parlava un po' come esempio, come caso negativo, ecco, come le cose non si fanno. Poi dopo siamo stati tutti travolti dall'ondata del Covid-19, dalle varie ondate di Covid-19, e l'Iran è passato un po' sotto silenzio. Oggi rimane, salta agli occhi un dato importante, cioè che nonostante oggi si comincino in questi ultimi giorni sono stato un record di vaccinazioni, cioè si sta veramente vaccinando giorno e notte in Iran, i decessi sono tanti proprio perché si è cominciato tardi. In questo momento si sta vaccinando la popolazione intorno ai 50 anni. Ecco Negar. Welcome, Negar.
Hi, sorry, I had some technical difficulties. I had to launch a different browser. How are you? Ciao.
Oh, ciao, welcome, Hoshamadid. I was just a little presentation about you, about your work. So you start this fundraising last year. We're just talking about the COVID situation in Iran, and this is what I was trying to talking about. Why COVID-19 hit Iran so bad?
Yes, so as you know, I'm a journalist and political analyst based in Washington, D.C., and I've been following Iranian politics as well as U.S.-Iran relations for over a decade. So Iran, as many of your audience know, is under very strict economic sanctions by the United States that especially increased after former President Trump, pulled out of the JCPOA and started this campaign of maximum pressure. And this maximum pressure has really been a maximum pressure on the Iranian economy. Now, as far as its political goals, that's a completely different discussion. I can talk about that later. But it has induced massive pressure on the Iranian economy. There's also a lot of corruption and mismanagement inside the country by government officials. Part of this corruption also, again, ties to the sanctions. The state and the government want to go around sanctions, so they have created these uninformal sectors within the economy, which also breed more corruption. So just to give you that background, COVID was an extra layer added to that. So an economy that was already pretty strained. I think Iran at this moment is the most sanctioned country around the world, very isolated economically and with this massive corruption in the country. And then COVID hit. And I'm sure everyone who's watching us knows about the economic pressure that COVID put on all countries around the world, including here in the United States, where you are, in Europe, and also various other countries around the world. But with an economy that was already weak in Iran, this COVID situation just became even more complicated, especially for middle classes, for working classes, people who had to go back to work, people who had to take public transportation. The government didn't have enough cash to impose real quarantines, to tell people to sit at home, because when you impose a quarantine, you have to feed the people. You can't tell them to not work without money. So there have been multiple waves of this COVID hitting Iran. We're in the 5th wave right now, and it's just become very bad. Iran was also one of the first countries to be experiencing an outburst outside China, and it has been the epicenter of the virus in the Middle East. So the virus has also been introduced to other countries in the Middle East through Iran. And finally, I want to add that Iran is also host to a large number of refugees, especially Afghan refugees. Iran is the 2nd largest host of Afghan refugees after Pakistan, because obviously Afghanistan has direct borders with massive land borders with Iran and Pakistan. And this COVID situation and the sanctions and economic pressure also put a very serious pressure on these refugee populations that are increasing. Just recently, Relief International was reporting that about 5,000 refugees are crossing the border into Iran from Afghanistan every day. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but that was just an introduction to what's going on.
Oh yeah, thanks. I was just showing this data, this updated today, and it's a really a bad situation. It's a really impressive situation. Daily death, and today the last data is on August 28th. But it seems data that for us in Europe and maybe also in the United States are data of the last year, of the second or the third wave of coronavirus. But now in Iran, it's very, very bad.
Yes, it is pretty bad, as you're saying. And I also want to point out that obviously, because of the political situation in Iran, there aren't so many independent and free media and journalists able to operate. So there has been that layer of information or misinformation also added to the situation. So we don't know what the real numbers are. There have been multiple researches showing that the actual number of both cases and also deaths could be much higher than what we're looking at. These are official numbers. And then adding one more issue from the beginning of the pandemic, because of sanctions, of these economic sanctions that isolate Iran financially, it was difficult for the Iranian medical sector to purchase COVID tests at the very beginning, and also to purchase vaccine. And that has also slowed the process of detecting the virus when it first started spreading, and then also to do mass vaccination. So it's just a terrible, but a perfect example of how politics is completely hurting this situation, whereas the global community is supposed to be dealing with this pandemic and this virus in unity.
Maybe today we have also another political problem, an internal political problem. I mean, until 2 months ago, Iran didn't want Western vaccines. The supreme leader Ali Khamenei said, "No, we don't trust them. We don't trust America. We don't trust West, and so we prefer to take vaccine from China." Uh, I have here a comment from a friend of ours that said, Medician said that the Chinese vaccine is good just for the 45%. And I have some reports from Iran that people that get vaccinated with with two doses of vaccines died. And it was a mistake, or it was a political choice?
It was a political mistake.
Oh, yeah.
It was both. So this goes back, this is basically the domestic side of this political fight that I have been talking about, because essentially to show the West that to come out with this anti-Western political gesture, which is something the Iranian leaders have been doing for the past 4 decades and after the revolution, and to also sort of show them that we don't need your vaccine anyways. Because the whole slogan of the political class, and especially the hardliners and the conservatives, the anti-West part of Iran's political system, their whole slogan is that we don't need the West, we don't need America, we don't need Europe, we don't need Western goods, we don't need Western financial system, we don't need Western medicine, we don't need any of that. And we're independent, and we rely on ourselves, and we can take care of ourselves no matter what America does. So this was just another manifestation of this ideology, basically, of this worldview that manifested in a very dangerous way, combined with the fact that Iran couldn't get American vaccines anyways, even if they wanted to, or at least at the beginning, unless the Biden administration started donating some through the World Health Organization and all of that. But there's no way for Iran to directly purchase this kind of material from the United States. And it was a political gesture, but it was a very dangerous one. And it wasn't just said that we're going to get the vaccines from China. The other key element of this slogan was that we're going to make it ourselves. We're going to produce the vaccine ourselves. And Iran does have a long tradition, about 100-year-old institution that has been producing simple vaccines. But this is a very special case. It was a very sensitive time, and speed was very important. And it's just now clear after months and months of trial and all of this talk of the Iranian vaccine, that the Iranian vaccine is not going to be either working or to be produced in the mass amounts that the political elite have been promising. And going back to that case of corruption, that there's also been a lot of corruption of the funds that were supposed to be allocated to this internal vaccine, basically making certain people rich inside the country without getting the vaccine to those who need it. And then in the meanwhile, to add insult to injury, a lot of the political elite, the more affluent classes in the country, have been able to pay and have access to foreign vaccines. Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca. If you're willing to pay, you can get your hands on those vaccines in Iran. And that just makes the population so much more angry at this domestic and international political fight that Iran has been involved in.
Yeah. In the last weeks, we saw a lot of people, long files, people in the night to get the vaccines. And they said, we suddenly discovered that we bought a lot of doses, while they said until 2 months ago that we didn't have the money to buy them. And it's just a political move by the new government. The new president Raisi is trying to catch the favor of people with this move, and it's working. Is it working?
Well, it sure is. Part of it is that element. Of course, the new president, the conservative, the ultra-conservative and the hardliner Raisi and his cabinet, they have been very much opposed and vocally critical of the previous administration, moderates of the administration of Hassan Rouhani. And one of the key pillars of their criticism of that administration was diplomacy with the West, their outreach to Europe and to the United States. And they've combined it with this whole pandemic situation, again, making everything political, but also trying to portray that moderate government was not competent in vaccinating the population. So this is definitely part of that political move with this new administration coming in, promising economic recovery, promising mass vaccination. But I think it's too early. We still have to wait and see how much they can achieve. It's also time. As time goes by, more people are vaccinated everywhere in the world. So, but as far as this being a more competent administration, I think it's still too early to see. But what's clear is that the hardliners and the conservatives definitely politicized this pandemic and the virus. And they were a big hurdle to Iran trying to access any kind of foreign equipment and medicine.
Per i nostri amici, se avete problemi nella comprensione potete farmi delle domande, poi io ovviamente tradurrò per Negar. Mi raccomando, credo che stiate capendo tutti, non l'ho interrotto per tradurre perché credo che capiate tutti benissimo l'inglese. So we arrive to your project. This is your project. Help Iranians fight coronavirus. Oh, please tell us what it is and how we could help Iranian people.
So this project, again, there's always a sanctions layer to every part of this story. And because what I'm covering is politics, this is something I deal with on a daily basis. I realized from talking to humanitarians and NGOs who work on the ground in Iran that sanctions are a big problem to any kind of humanitarian funds going into the country. So right now, if I was an Italian expatriate in the US and I wanted to raise money for an Italian NGO or for an Italian hospital or an Italian doctor's office or anything, I could just do that and then send the money and it would be completely legal. If this was for Turkey, for most of the other countries. But as an Iranian or an Iranian American, that's impossible because of financial sanctions. So I can't just, even if I want to, I can't just raise funds and give it to an Iranian NGO or give it to a hospital, or for, even if it's for medical purposes, I can't do any of that. And when the pandemic first started and the news of the pandemic was spreading, a lot of people, both Iranians in the diaspora, Iranian Americans, and also non-Iranians, would approach me and say, we want to help. What can we do? Mm-hmm. And it was so difficult because for someone living abroad, especially in the US, there aren't so many choices. There are a few NGOs that are based in the US that can directly raise money, but there's a cap. They can only raise, I think the number is $500,000 per year. So there was that going on. And then for NGOs inside Iran, you can't. And there's basically what you're left with is the UN system, and also a couple of international but smaller NGOs who work on the ground. And Relief International, this NGO that I started a fundraiser for, Relief International is one of the few organizations who has a license from the US government to operate in Iran. That's the absurd part of it. As an international NGO from anywhere in the world, you need a license from the US government to operate. And they still have problems getting funds, getting material, and all of that. So I just decided to do something that as an American is not illegal for me, and also for anybody who lives in the US or Iranians in the diaspora who can help. So I launched this GoFundMe campaign, a fundraiser to raise funds that would directly be paid to Relief International, the organization. I started this last year when the virus first started. And we reached our goal, and Relief International added some staff, and they started also working with refugees, with women, heads of household, in producing masks and personal protective equipment, because that's another issue. It's not just the tests and the vaccines that I mentioned, it was also personal protection equipment that the Iranians were having a hard time purchasing from outside because of this hurdle of sanctions. And I wrote a detailed report about this for Foreign Policy magazine. I encourage everyone to go see how Iranian nurses didn't have enough access to protective material when they were on the front lines of fighting COVID. So I did that. And then when the withdrawal from Afghanistan happened and the situation just became so chaotic there, again, people came back to me asking how they can help Afghan refugees. And there's so many ways you can help Afghan refugees. There are so many great organizations that are present on the ground in Afghanistan. There are great organizations that work with Afghan refugees in Iran, the Norwegian Refugee Council and whatnot. And Relief International, again, is one of those few organizations that right now is doing both work on COVID and also work with Afghan refugees. So I just re-shared my campaign, because that's how GoFundMe lets you just continue the campaign if you want. There's no deadline. So I just re-shared it, asking people that if you want to help Afghan refugees going into Iran, this is a great organization because it's working both angles on the ground.
Yeah, and it's very, very clear. I mean, we have here for $30 you can buy hand sanitizer for 10 families, for $50 and 95 masks for health workers, and so on. It's very here on the website. It's very, very clear, and I invite you, all our friends, to donate. And this is the link, and also here in the comment.
Let me just add this one point, is that there are two important points. One is that these funds go directly to the organization, because some people were asking me, do I get the money? Does the Iranian government get the money? No. The way the GoFundMe is set up is that organization, Relief International, has an account with the website, and the funds go directly to the organization. They don't come to me. That's one thing. And the other thing is, they don't give the funds to local suppliers or the government-related, suppliers. They either purchase them from abroad or they purchase them locally, and they directly, when we talk about masks, they directly hand them to health workers, or they do other things. And the vocational part of the work is also very interesting. They set up this little workshop of women, Afghan women, and heads of households who can produce some COVID material like masks, like protective equipment. And in a way, they're both in both a local community for job opportunities, and they're also producing these material locally so they don't have to import everything from outside the country.
Okay, so this is very, very important. It's not to the Iranian government. I said to my friend, be sure of this.
Exactly.
Because please.
Just this last point, of course, as an international NGO, anybody who works inside Iran has to be in, contact with the government. Everything has to be done legal with, permission and all of that, like every country in the world. But it's not like they hand the funds to government agencies. It doesn't work like that.
So our friend, just a question from Guillermo said, but why they didn't choose the Russia way for the vaccine? Maybe because China offered in a kind of larger scope political issue. Russian Sputnik could be a good mediation for Iran saving the face. I don't know.
That's a good question. I think it's a matter of access because, and as far as I'm not a physician, but as far as I've read credible reports, both the Chinese vaccine, the Sinopharm and the other one, and also Sputnik have very high rates of effectiveness. They're good vaccines. I have nothing against those vaccines. I got the American vaccine myself, but it would have been good for any country to get those high vaccines. And in fact, from what I understand from researchers, any vaccine made by any country would be better than no vaccine when it comes to this virus. So Iran was focusing more on the Chinese, even though they have good relations both with China and Russia. They have good political relations and they have strong trade ties with both. I'm not sure how much Russia offered of the Sputnik vaccine. Maybe the Chinese had more of a mass production. There was also, I think there's this sense of responsibility because the virus was introduced to Iran from China because of this direct relations and trade, and part of it, again, for Iran to defy sanctions. A lot of countries they stopped flights to China and they stopped travel back and forth, and Iran didn't. Which the population actually blames the government for doing that, for introducing the virus. But I think it's a combination of a political issue and also access. So I don't know how much Sputnik was available or the Russians offered, but the Iranian political elite doesn't have, we didn't see any public opposition to either the Russian or the vaccine. It was mostly the American and British-made vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna.
Yesterday, I heard a very strange and bad news from Iran. There, even there now, there are no vax demonstration, little demonstration of people that don't want to get the vaccine. I'm very surprised of this.
Yes, I don't know the number. I didn't see, I saw the photos like you. It doesn't seem like it's a mass movement, like, for example, here in the United States. And also in general, I think this anti-vaccine movement or phenomena is very much a first world problem because, and I experienced it here in the United States, the vaccine is so available that people can afford the luxury of saying, I have the choice of not taking it. Yeah. If you didn't have the choice, like my old uncle in a remote city in Iran, my family members, I've lost some family members in Iran because of COVID, and not all of them were old, by the way. Some of them were healthy and fairly young or middle-aged. So for those people who don't have access, they're yearning for the vaccine. And that's what I experienced speaking to many Iranians who live inside Iran. Everyone I speak to is talking about how they can get the vaccine, why they don't get the vaccine. This damn government is not producing the vaccine. They're not importing the vaccine. All of the talk, there's even hashtags on social media saying, buy the vaccine, get the vaccine, and things like that. So yes, there are some demonstrations, but I don't think there's a big anti-vaccine movement in Iran. And also, let me add this more historical point. Iran actually, surprisingly, has a pretty strong and established public health system. Yeah. And they did a mass vaccination movement for polio, for a lot of child age diseases. Years and years ago, they established this in a way, very socialist and completely government-run mass vaccination. It was very popular and very well known. Even in the most remote areas of the country, they would go to people's houses. So if they know somebody has a child or a newborn, they would go and provide the vaccine on location. And it's actually been studied, the public health system been studied as a successful system in the region. So that, I think, helped this mass vaccination. But you also need the vaccine. You need to have the vaccine to use the system to distribute it. So it's just a complex situation, and obviously a lot of it has to do with politics. And then, you've witnessed this from Europe. Every country was making a lot of mistakes and still is along the way with this pandemic. It just threw everybody off. But when you have those added layers of internal and international problems, it just becomes much more complicated.
I see. Well, you were talking about the medical system. I suggest always this book to our friends because it's very interesting to learn, to discover the politics and the welfare state in Iran, and especially for the medical system. It's very, very interesting. So just a few questions about you, then thank you, because I don't want to take you too much time. But you raised in Iran and then in Germany and then moved to United States, didn't you?
That's correct. Most of my life, I was born and raised in Iran. Just I lived in Germany for 2 years.
Okay. Where in Iran? Where? Tehran?
Born and raised in Tehran.
Well, and how is the situation? I mean, in the United States, there is a big community, a great community of Iranian American, and especially on the West Coast. But I don't know. How is the climate? How is how Iranian people is facing this pandemic, this this COVID-19 emergency in relation to their native country? There is a mode of solidarity, or is I don't know. Please tell us.
Are you talking about the Iranian diaspora living in the US?
Yeah.
Well, it's a very large diaspora. There's a few million Iranians living outside of Iran, and I think the United States has either the largest or one of the largest communities of the diaspora. And like you're saying, most of them are in California, but they're also spread. And also here in the Washington, D.C. area, it's a large community of Iranians. There's a very strong and universal love for the homeland, for the people, for the culture, for the civilization. On politics, there's a lot of disagreements, even fights, and everyone is so passionate about politics. But when it comes to the country, to the homeland, to the people, to the culture, to the food, to the civilization, all of that, when Donald Trump tweeted that we're going to bomb Iran's cultural sites, that was mass condemnation from all political fronts. When he imposed the travel ban on Iranians, there was mass condemnation because there are Iranians who are Democrats, Iranians who are progressives, and there are Iranian Americans who are very Republican. Some of them worked in Republican governments. So there's a very diverse political view, but as far as the love for the homeland and for the people, they're very united. There's a lot of philanthropy. But again, going back to that sanction story, there's also a lot of hurdles. As Iranian Americans, many things you do in relation to the homeland are criminalized by U.S. law. So we can't just send money to NGOs under any circumstances. We can't work with Iranian organizations. We can't work with Iranian people. As an Iranian American, you're not even supposed to check your bank account when you are in Iran, when you're traveling around. So a lot of ordinary things that other diaspora communities do in relation to the country. For example, they go somewhere else and they work and they just keep sending money back. A lot of these things, most of these things that other diaspora communities are used to do are criminalized, especially when it has to do with finances for Iranian Americans. So that makes it very difficult. But there are strong ties with the homeland. For those of us who are not political, I'm political. My work is politics. I'm a journalist, so I live in exile. It's very dangerous for me to travel back to Iran. I'll probably be persecuted. And there's a small community of journalists and activists who are like that, who fear that and who live in exile. But the larger community of the diaspora, people who don't work on politics, there's a lot of engineers, a lot of doctors, a lot of all kinds of other Iranians. They have strong ties. They do a lot of travel, and they serve as a bridge between Iran and the US because there are no official relations between these two countries. And yeah, so there is solidarity. I know they follow the news of the homeland. They get angry when it's bad news. They get sad, and they try to help in any way they can, the Iranian people.
Last question. I swear it's the last. Do you have any hope about the nuclear talks and how the Afghanistan situation could afford these talks?
Political question. Finally.
Yeah, finally.
I was very optimistic when Joe Biden first became president. I was, even in my analysis, I believe that he could rejoin the nuclear deal very quickly, very easily. It's something that Kamala Harris, the vice president, also had said. Senior people in his administration, in State Department, National Security Council, were involved in the nuclear negotiations in the Obama administration. And he could have done it very fast and get it over with, because there was a short window of opportunity with Joe Biden being the president here and the moderates in Iran having the administration. He lost that window of opportunity. And now he has to deal with a conservative/hardline administration, a cabinet of ideologues, very much anti-West, very much anti-diplomacy, very much anti-JCPOA. So I'm cautiously optimistic, a bit pessimistic. I don't know. We have to wait and see how the hardliners have changed and how pragmatic they have become. Because they say, in their slogans, they say, we're not opposed to the deal, we're not opposed to diplomacy. But in practice, they have shown before that this is not something they want and they can do. So the road ahead is complicated, is more difficult than it was during those first 6 months of Biden's presidency. I had been warning that this is a golden window of opportunity. Other analysts here in Washington were warning the same. The administration didn't take that warning seriously, and now they have to deal with a hardliner for the rest of Joe Biden's term. 1 or 2 terms
Sure.
is going to coincide. And that has been the problem. Let me just end it on this. That has been the problem with US and Iran in the past 4 decades. Yes, political tensions started after the revolution, but at least in the past 25 years, every time there was somebody who wanted to make amends and, make some ties on one side, coincided with someone who was against it. So there was Khatami, and then Bush came, and then Ahmadinejad on the Iranian side, Obama, Rouhani, and now he's gone. So these 6 months were really golden, but they were lost. Of course, Joe Biden is also dealing with a lot of domestic fights here in the US. It's a very polarized country, very divided country. It was a difficult decision, and it needed a lot of political capital to be spent to return to the deal. He didn't. At the same time, he pulled out of the war in Afghanistan. That was a bold move, and he paid a big price for that. So we'll have to see. Maybe that Afghanistan tragedy, what's happening is a tragedy, would have a silver lining because of the refugee situation, because Afghanistan is an immediate neighbor next to Iran, and because Iran is a power in the region that cannot be ignored, and all of that, and this general policy of ending the endless wars and the military entanglement in the Middle East, because the Biden administration wants to actually disentangle from the Middle East. Maybe there would be a silver lining, and there would be more cooperation between Iran and Europe, Iran and the US, after this Afghanistan chaos. But, a lot of unknowns, we have to wait and see. But what's clear is that there was a golden window of opportunity, and President Biden missed that. So the road ahead is difficult, and it's complicated.
It was a short time.
It was.
6 months, very short, but it wasn't enough, unfortunately. So please cari amici, donate, questo è il link di sotto. I'm inviting friends to donate to the link, but also to follow Negar, is her website, and to follow her on Twitter, and you have a really interesting podcast, and so to have news from Iran, and about politics and analysis on Iran. So thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure to have you here with us. Hope to see you again, and inshallah.
Thanks for having me, grazie, and it was lovely to see you and to be on your show.
Grazie a tutti, cari amici. Noi ci vediamo domani sera con chi lo vorrà, con Dawood Abbassi in collegamento da Teheran. Grazie ancora. Bye. Have a good day.
Bye, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.